For 32 years, I was the quiet woman. The background to his life, the caretaker to his mother, the keeper of a home that never quite felt like mine. My biggest dream, a small sunroom, was always dismissed as a frivolous hobby. Until the day he learned the difference between a hobby and a masterpiece. Good morning, my dears. Pour yourself something warm and settle in. Today, I want to talk about silence. Not the empty kind, but the fertile kind. The silence in which you can hear the truth of your own life, like a seed cracking open deep in the dark earth. My story is about a sunroom. And how the most important thing you will ever build, is the door to your own freedom. It started with a soft lie. Isn't that how they always begin? A gentle untruth wrapped in the language of care. A story told not to wound but to manage. To shape. It was the year after we married and the world had gone gray for me. My parents were taken in a sudden twist of highway metal and rain. The grief was a physical thing, a hollowed-out place beneath my ribs that made breathing an act of conscious will. And in the middle of that fog came a piece of paper, a statement from a lawyer. My inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, not in the way some people think of fortunes. But it was a lifetime of my father's quiet diligence, his chalk-dusted sleeves and patient corrections in the margins of essays. It was my mother's careful saving, the way she could make a single pot of soup taste like abundance for 3 days. It was their love made tangible. They left me a backbone. That's what my mother whispered to me in the hospital, though her words were slurred and fading. She gripped my hand with a strength that surprised me. This is your backbone, May. You stand on this. You don't let anyone tell you how to stand. But you see, I was not standing. I was kneeling by a hospital bed. I was lost in a suit of grief too big for me. And Robert, he was there. He was handsome in his sorrow for me. He brought tissues and handled the funeral arrangements and spoke in low, respectful tones to the relatives. He seemed like a harbor in my storm. When the check cleared, when that piece of my parents settled into my account, it felt strange. Like holding a sacred object I didn't know how to use. Robert took my hands one evening. His hands were warm and dry. He looked into my eyes with such tender concern. Darling, he said, my love, this money, this weight of it. The market is a terrifying place right now. All these fluctuations. Let me carry this for you. Let me handle it. We'll invest it together. For our future. For our family. It will be ours. The way he said ours felt like a blanket. A promise of shared burden. I was so tired. The thought of navigating stock tables and bond yields felt like trying to read in a language I didn't know. I just wanted someone to take this heavy sacred thing and make it safe. So I nodded. I signed what he put in front of me. I trusted. That was my role, wasn't it? To be the heart while he was the head. To be the feeling while he was the function. I transferred it all, every last piece of my backbone, into an account he managed. For a month there was a peace. The grief was still there, but there was a practicality to it now. We were planning. We were building. Then he came home one evening. His shoulders were slumped. His face was a portrait of a man bearing bad news he wished he didn't have to deliver. He led me to the sofa. He held both my hands. May, he said, my love, I have to tell you something. That investment, the advice I got, it was bad. Wrong. There was a collapse. A failure. He said the words, but they swam around me. Collapse. Failure. Lost. He looked as if he might cry. His grief seemed even deeper than mine because it was layered with guilt. I failed you, he whispered. I was trying to build for us and I failed. And what did I do? Can you believe it? I comforted him. I stroked his hair. I said, shush. It's all right. It's just money. We have each other. We have your salary. We'll be fine. I absorbed his guilt into my own empty space. I made my own loss smaller to hold the size of his regret. I thought that was love. To fold your own pain to make room for another's. That lie became the silent foundation of everything. It settled into the bricks of our home, into the patterns of our days. Every decision afterward was built upon it. When I would see a dress in a catalog and mention it offhand, he would give a kind, weary smile. Oh, May, if only. We have to be careful now, you know. We're on one salary. We're rebuilding. And I would nod. Of course. We're rebuilding. When the refrigerator began its low constant hum and I suggested a new one, he would sigh, the sound of a man carrying invisible weights. Let's try to make it last another year. We need to be prudent. And I would learn to ignore the hum. It became the background music of my prudence. When his mother Eleanor arrived with her steamer trunk, her illness a vague but permanent guest, it was simply understood. We can't afford a nurse, May. You're so good with her. It's just for a little while. And my care, my labor, my endless quiet hours became the currency with which we paid our debts. A debt I never incurred. The lie made everything a transaction where my coin was always devalued. My desire for a sunroom, a little room of light. A lovely dream, May. But the cost. Maybe someday. Someday was a destination he alone could see on a map he kept folded in his pocket. The lie made me a permanent tenant in a life he owned. I paid rent with my silence, with my labor, with the slow steady evaporation of my wants until they were so small they were mere vapors. I would look at my hands and see my mother's hands, but without the deed to anything. I had handed over the deed. I had given him my backbone and he had stored it away and told me it was lost. And I believed him. I built my life on the belief that I was fragile, that the world was too volatile for me to navigate, that my security was best held in his hands. I built my life on the absence of my own foundation. And a life built on an absence will always have a chill at its center. You can fill it with activity, with duty, with the needs of others, but the chill remains. You feel it in the quiet moments. You feel it when you're alone in a room and you realize you are not actually sure what you like anymore, because your liking has been conditioned by the constant gentle pressure of what is prudent, what is possible, what is allowed on the budget of a lost inheritance. That lie was the first brick in my beautiful silent prison. And I placed it there myself. I handed him the brick and smiled and thanked him for carrying the weight. It was the quiet after the final breath that got inside my bones. Not the silence of peace, but the hollow ringing silence of a bell that has just been struck. Eleanor was gone. The house which for 32 years had vibrated with her subtle demands, her pointed sighs, her schedule of constitutionals, now felt like a seashell. You could hear the echo of an ocean you never visited. We buried her on a Tuesday under a flat gray sky. The right kind of weather for her farewell. Robert was handsome in his grief, his face a study in dignified loss. He held my arm a little tighter as we walked from the gravesite. "It will be different now, May," he said. "Just you and me." I nodded, but the words felt like stones dropped into a deep well. I heard the splash, but I could not see the bottom. For a week the house absorbed our new routine. We moved around each other like satellites in separate orbits. He went back to the office. I cleaned the space she had occupied with a kind of frantic energy. I stripped the sheets from her bed, washed the windowsill where her medicine bottles had stood in a neat soldierly row. I wiped away the faint circle her water glass had left on the nightstand. I was erasing her physical presence, but her judgment lingered in the air like a particular scent you cannot wash from a curtain. A week after the funeral he brought the box home. It was a floral thing covered in a pattern of faded roses. He set it on the dining table with a soft thud. "Mother's things from her nightstand. Be a dear and sort through it. Toss the junk. Maybe keep a trinket." He kissed my forehead, a dry perfunctory touch, and retreated to his study. The door clicked shut. I stood looking at the box. It seemed to pulse with a low energy. A final dispatch from the front lines of her life. It sat there for 3 days. I would pass it on my way to the kitchen. It became a part of the landscape, a small monument to a finished war. I would catch sight of it from the corner of my eye and feel a strange reluctance. It felt like opening a grave. On the 4th day, a Thursday, I think the light was that particular thin pale yellow of late autumn. I made a pot of Earl Grey, the scent of bergamot sharp and clean. I sat at the table with my cup and saucer. I lifted the lid. The smell was lavender and camphor and something else, the faint papery scent of old skin. There lay the artifacts of a controlled life. A leather-bound Bible, the edges worn soft. A tube of lip balm rolled almost to its end. A packet of embroidered handkerchiefs. A few photographs. I lifted them out one by one, placing them on the polished wood. Robert as a boy, serious and straight-backed. Robert in his graduation gown. Robert with his father, a man who was mostly a blur in our family lore, a silent figure who had escaped into an early grave. I sifted through these relics of a son's life curated by his mother. At the bottom, beneath a layer of crisp ivory writing paper that had never been used, I felt it. Not the soft give of fabric or the brittle corner of a photograph. Something firm, sleek, an envelope. I drew it out. It was a standard business envelope. Legal size. The paper was heavy and expensive. It was not old. The corners were sharp. This was not a relic from decades past. This was a document from the now. And across the front in Eleanor's precise unwavering hand was a single word. Proof. The ink was black and deep. She had pressed hard. I know her handwriting the way you know the face of a longtime opponent. This was written with intention. This was a label, a diagnosis. My heart did not race. It did the opposite. It seemed to grow very still and very heavy in my chest, a cold smooth stone. My fingers, which had been warm from the teacup, went cool. I turned the envelope over. It was not sealed. The flap was tucked neatly inside. I set my cup down carefully so the china would not clatter. I slid out the contents. They were not letters. They were not sentimental keepsakes. They were bank statements, a thick sheaf of them held together by a black paperclip. The top one was recent. The account name was Robert James Hollis. His full name, the one he used for legal documents. The account number was a string of digits that meant nothing to me. The balance was a number that did not seem real. It was a number from a story, a number that belonged to other people in big houses with long driveways. I stared at it. The zeros lined up like little empty eyes. I began to leaf through them. The paper made a soft shushing sound, the sound of leaves turning in a slow wind. Each statement was a snapshot of a secret life. Deposits of amounts that made my breath catch. Transfers with codes I did not understand. The dates marched backward in time. Month after month, year after year. I went faster now, my fingers trembling slightly. I needed to see the beginning. I needed to find the source of this hidden river. And then I saw it. The oldest statement. The paper was different, slightly yellower at the edges. The date was from the year after we married. The spring after my parents died. And there it was. The initial deposit. The amount was etched into my soul. I knew it down to the last cent. It was the exact sum of my inheritance. The backbone. The transaction description was a string of numbers and letters, but the amount was a fingerprint. My fingerprint. I sat back in the chair. The air left my lungs in a long slow exhale I had not known I was holding. I looked at that number on that old piece of paper. Then I looked at the recent statement with its obscene and beautiful total. I understood. He had not lost it. He had transplanted it. He had taken my single sapling and planted it in his own private fertile soil. He had tended it in secret. He had fed it with his annual bonuses, with dividends, with money that had never touched the common air of our joint life. The monthly allowance he gave me for groceries, for utilities, for the running of this house was a trickle from a faucet. This was the reservoir. And he had built the dam. The quiet in the room became absolute. The hum of the refrigerator faded. The tick of the clock on the mantel disappeared. There was only the shushing of these papers in my hands, the rustling proof of my own invisibility. I saw not numbers but things. The sunroom I never built. The trips I never took. The peace of mind I never owned. The security my mother told me to stand on had been used as the foundation for a separate, taller structure I was not allowed to enter. And Eleanor, she knew. She had curated this evidence. Proof. She had saved it. For what? For leverage. For a moment like this. Had she imagined I would find it? Or had she kept it as a record of her son's cleverness, a trophy of his control? She had watched me for 32 years. She had watched me balance the books she thought were the only books. She had watched me fret over the cost of a new roof, over the doctor's bills. She had sat in her chair by the window and observed the careful economy of my life, an economy built on a lie she had the evidence to disprove. And she had said nothing. Her silence was her complicity. Her preservation of this envelope was her final judgment on my place in the story. I was not a partner. I was a subject who did not need to know the state of the treasury. I did not cry. Tears felt too small for this. This was not a sorrow. It was a cataclysm. The entire landscape of my life, the ground I had walked on for 3 decades, shifted and rearranged itself in an instant. The hills were valleys. The paths were dead ends. The house I kept, the meals I cooked, the quiet loyalty I offered, it was all built on this single sheet of paper from long ago. The lie was not a moment of weakness. It was a financial plan. A long-term strategy. And I was the client who had never been informed of the risks. I was the asset that had been gracefully depreciated. I heard his footsteps in the hall then. The solid confident tread of a man in his own home. The papers suddenly felt hot in my hands. I moved with a calm I did not feel. I slid the statements back into their sleek envelope. I tucked the envelope beneath the layer of unused writing paper. I placed the photographs on top. I closed the box just as he walked into the dining room. "Find anything interesting?" he asked. He was loosening his tie, his mind already elsewhere, on the evening's dinner, on the newspaper, on the television news. I looked up at him. I saw the man I had loved. I saw the architect of my silent confinement. They were the same person. The realization was like ice water in my veins. "No, dear," I said. My voice was a smooth stone in a pond. It made no ripples. "Just some old papers. Nothing of consequence." He nodded absently and walked to the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator door open and close. I looked down at my hands resting on the floral lid of the box. They were steady. The cold, smooth stone in my heart had anchored me. The blueprint of my prison was now in my possession. And when you have the blueprint, you can find the door. You can, even if you are very patient and very quiet, build a new one. The toolbox was a heavy red metal thing. It had been my father's. It sat in the far corner of the garage for years, gathering a fine gray dust. I would pass it sometimes when fetching a broom or looking for a spare fuse. It was a relic from a world of physical solutions. My father could fix a leaky faucet. He could patch a screen door. His hands were always slightly rough. I never thought of those hands as being like mine. My hands were for kneading dough, for arranging flowers, for folding laundry. They were soft hands, polite hands. The morning after I found the envelope, I went to the garage. I did not turn on the overhead light. The dawn was just a suggestion, a pale blue-gray at the small window. I knelt on the concrete floor. The cold seeped through my house dress. I wiped the dust from the latch with my palm. It opened with a click that sounded too loud in the silence. Inside, the tools lay in their molded slots. A hammer with a worn wooden handle. A set of screwdrivers, their tips silver from use. A tape measure coiled tight. A level with a tiny bubble trapped in yellow oil. They were not mysterious. They were just things. But they were things that acted upon the world. They changed the shape of things. They joined things together. I lifted the hammer. It was heavier than I expected. The weight was solid and true. I wrapped my fingers around the handle. The wood was smooth from my father's grip. In that cold garage, holding a tool I had never used, I felt a thread connect across time and loss. It was not a sentimental feeling. It was a practical one. He had known how to build. He had left me the means. I had just forgotten I was allowed. The Sunroom kit arrived on a flatbed truck. The driver was a young man with kind eyes. He helped me unload the boxes and the long bundles of wrapped glass onto the driveway. It made a mountain of potential. Robert came home that evening. His car tires crunched on the gravel. He got out and stood there, his briefcase in his hand. He stared at the pile. His face moved through confusion to a mild irritation, then settled into that familiar indulgent bemusement. "May, what on earth is all this?" "My sunroom," I said. I was standing on the back porch, my arms crossed against the chill. But the cost. The planning." His voice had that tone. The one he used when I ventured an idea outside the approved list. It was the tone of a parent hearing a child's impractical dream. "I used my garden club savings," I said. The lie came out smooth as cream. "And I've already spoken to the city. The permit is in order." I held up a piece of paper I had obtained that very afternoon. It was my first official act of creation. The bureaucrat at the desk had called me ma'am and stamped the form without looking up. It was that easy. He was flustered. This was action he had not sanctioned. Initiative he had not approved. "Well, I suppose, if it's what you really want. It'll be a lot of work. I'm swamped at the firm, you know I can't." "I don't need your help, Robert." I said it gently. The gentleness disarmed him. It wrapped the independence in the soft cloth of wifely consideration. "I think I'd like to build it myself. A project. To keep me busy." He studied my face. He was looking for defiance, for rebellion, for the hard edge of anger. He found only a placid determination. He mistook it for a new kind of hobby. A quaint occupation for a menopausal woman. He patted my shoulder. "Well, all right then. A hobby. It'll be good for you. Just, Keep the yard tidy. And he walked into the house already dismissing it. A hobby. That was the word that gave me permission. He relegated it to the realm of the harmless, the trivial. He could not see the steel beneath the softness. The next morning I began. The instructions were diagrams and numbers. I spread them out on the grass, weighing the corners down with stones. The foundation had to be perfectly square. I learned that word, square. It meant truth. It meant right angles to the world. I hammered wooden stakes into the earth. I ran string between them. I crouched down and sighted along the line. I adjusted and adjusted until the bubble in my father's level sat perfectly between its two black lines. Centered, balanced. That bubble became my religion. I mixed concrete in a rented drum. The powder was a pale gray dust. I added water and stirred with a long paddle. The effort made my shoulders burn. The mixture became thick and heavy like wet stone. I poured it into the wooden forms I had built. I troweled the surface smooth. It was the color of the sky before rain. This slab, this cold flat stone, was the first true thing I had ever made. It would hold the weight of everything. The silence of my work was profound. It was not the silence of suppression I had lived in for so long. It was a silence of intense focus. The world narrowed to the next nail, the next measurement, the next board. The sounds were new sounds. The scritch of the pencil on wood. The solid thunk of the hammer driving a nail home. The zip of the saw through pine. They were honest sounds. Each one was a decision made visible. There was no subtext. A board was either level or it was not. A joint was either tight or it was gaping. The materials did not lie. They did not manipulate. They simply were. And I was simply there with them. Robert would watch me sometimes. From the kitchen window, a silhouette behind the glass. I would feel his gaze like a faint pressure on my back. I would not turn around. I would keep working. He would stand there for a minute and then the curtain would fall back into place. He was observing a curiosity. A natural phenomenon, like a bird building a nest. It was instinctual, not intellectual. It required no comment. His disregard was my freedom. Because he did not value the process, he did not scrutinize it. He saw a woman playing with wood. He did not see an education. The first time I used the circular saw I was afraid. It was a brutal-looking thing. I plugged it into the extension cord. I put on the safety glasses I had bought. I marked my cut line on a 2x4. I took a breath. I pulled the trigger. The sound was not just loud. It was a scream. A violent, furious scream that tore through the pastoral quiet of the backyard. It was the sound of teeth biting through wood. It was the sound of transformation that was not gentle. I flinched. My whole body tightened. But then I pushed the blade forward. It met the wood and the scream took on a new pitch, a tone of work being done. Sawdust sprayed into the air like golden smoke. The two pieces fell apart cleanly. The cut edge was smooth and bright, smelling of pine. I released the trigger. The silence that rushed back in was ringing. My heart was pounding. I looked at the tool in my hand. It was just a tool. It was not evil. It was not kind. It was a means. And I had used it. I had commanded the scream. I had not apologized for the noise. That sound was my voice. A voice I did not have words for. A voice that said I can cut things apart. I can make new shapes from what exists. Day by day the skeleton of the room rose. The studs stood like ribs against the sky. I nailed them into place, each blow of the hammer a steady beat. My body changed. New muscles awoke along my arms and across my back. Aches settled into my bones at night, deep honest aches that came from use, not from dread. My hands became rough. Splinters embedded themselves in my palms. I would dig them out with a needle under a bright light. The soft skin hardened into calluses. I began to love those calluses. They were medals of labor. Proof that I had done something. They were the opposite of the smooth, helpless hands of the woman in the envelope story. These hands could grip. These hands could build. I worked through the fall. The air grew crisp. Leaves turned and fell around my worksite. I swept them away. I was building a space for light, so I worked while the light lasted. I sheathed the walls in plywood. I felt like I was building a drum, a great sounding box. Then came the roof. The trusses were heavy. I used a pulley system I rigged from the old oak tree. It was slow, methodical work. The day I nailed the last roofing panel into place, a light rain began to fall. I sat inside the shell on a sawhorse. I listened to the rain tap on the metal roof. It was a dry sound, a safe sound. I was inside something I had made and it was keeping the weather out. The feeling was so simple, so profound, it brought a pressure to my throat. It was shelter, of my own making. Finally came the glass. This was the most frightening part. Each pane was a large fragile sheet of clarity. I handled them with a fear that was close to reverence. I set them into the frames, sealed them with the rubber gaskets. One by one the world outside became a series of beautiful paintings. The oak tree, the fence, the sky. Framed. When the last pane was seated, when I clicked the final locking strip into place, I stepped back. I wiped my hands on my trousers. I stood in the center of the room. The silence changed again. It became a held breath. A luminous silence. The light poured in from all sides. It was diffuse and radiant. It had no shadows. It filled the empty space with a pure glowing presence. Dust motes danced in the beams. I could hear my own heartbeat. I brought the folding chair from the garage and set it in the exact center. I sat down. I did nothing. I said nothing. I simply sat in the product of my hands. He came out that evening. He stood at the threshold. He did not step inside. "Well now," he said, "you've done it. It's quite a thing." His voice echoed slightly in the empty space. He was looking at it as a structure, assessing its squareness, its finish. He did not feel its meaning. He smiled at me. "See, a hobby can be quite satisfying." He turned and went back to the house to pour his drink. I remained in my chair. The warmth of the day was trapped in the glass. It was a gentle, enveloping warmth. I realized then what I had truly been building. It wasn't a room. It was a capacity. The capacity to envision something. To plan it. To struggle with it. To finish it. The room was just the proof. The real construction was inside me. A new framework. A new way of being that was square and level and could bear weight. The scream of the saw was not just a sound. It was the sound of my old self being cut away. The hammer blows were the beats of a new heart being forged. Not a heart of sentiment, but a heart of resolve. Strong, steady, and utterly silent. The world inside the glass was a different country. From my folding chair at its center I could see everything, and yet I was separate from it all. The oak tree was a grand spectacle, its branches sketching slow patterns against the sky. The kitchen window was a distant yellow rectangle after dark. I could see his shape moving behind it. He was over there in the world of walls and ceilings and inherited furniture. I was in here in the world of light and potential and my own making. The glass did not just keep the weather out. It kept his understanding out. He would stand at that window sometimes, a silhouette holding a coffee cup. He would look out at my structure. He would watch me sitting there. And then he would turn away. The turning away was the key. It was the gesture that built my sanctuary higher than any wall. Because to him it was just a sunroom. A nice addition. A boost to the property value perhaps. A curious project his wife had taken on. He mentioned it to his friends. I overheard him on the phone in his study. "Oh, May's built herself a little glass house out back. Yes, all by herself. Quite the little carpenter." There was a chuckle in his voice. It was the chuckle one reserves for the charming eccentricities of a loved pet. A cat that has learned to fetch. It was remarkable only because the expectation had been so low. The achievement was cute. It was not serious. It did not signify a change in the nature of things. It was a hobby, and a hobby by definition exists in a sealed compartment of life. It does not leak into the important things. It does not threaten the balance of power. It is a sideshow. So he never came out. Not really. He stood at the threshold that one evening and made his comment. He walked around the outside once, inspecting the siding, the roofline, the way a man might inspect a child's treehouse, giving a paternal nod of approval. But he did not step inside. He did not cross the line from his world into mine. This was the great unspoken gift of his disregard. He did not value the space enough to violate it. His curiosity was superficial. He saw the object, but he was blind to the process. He was blind to the metamorphosis that had occurred in me among the sawdust and the shavings. Because he believed the only transformation that mattered was the one you could see on a balance sheet. The only growth that counted was numerical. The growth of a soul, the hardening of a will, the quiet crystallization of a plan, these were invisible to him. They were women's mysteries, intangible, and therefore not real. I began to spend my mornings there. I would rise before him in the gray pre-dawn. I would make a single cup of tea and carry it out across the dewy grass. I would unlock the simple latch. The door opened without a sound. I would sit. The first rays of the sun would strike the eastern glass, turning the whole room into a vessel of fire. I would feel the warmth on my skin. I would plan my day. But it was a new kind of planning. It was not a list of chores for him or for her or for the house that belonged to the bank. It was a list of steps for myself. A silent curriculum. Today I will research coastal towns in Maine. Today I will learn what a quitclaim deed is. Today I will find a lawyer who listens to women with quiet voices. The sunroom was my command center. The light was my advisor. It showed everything. It hid nothing. It asked only for clarity. He would wake and find me gone from the kitchen. He would peer out and see me sitting in my chair. He assumed I was daydreaming. Wool gathering. He would shake his head good-naturedly and go about his routine. My absence from his morning was not a protest. It was a relocation. I had moved the capital of my own life from the heart of his domain to this independent republic. I was conducting my state business here, and he granting me this autonomy because he thought the business was trivial. He thought I was staring at birds. He thought I was napping with my eyes open. He thought I was wasting time in the most harmless way a woman could. The emptiness of the room was its greatest feature. People asked me, neighbors, the few friends I had left, what will you put in there? Wicker furniture, a little sofa, some potted plants. I would smile and say I haven't decided. But I had decided. I would put nothing in it. It was not a room to be filled with objects from our shared past or with gifts that carried obligation. Its emptiness was a declaration. It was space, pure unclaimed potential. It was the physical manifestation of the future I was moving toward. A future not cluttered with the artifacts of this life. In this room I practiced being alone. I practiced being still. I practiced holding a thought, a plan, a desire without immediately translating it into service for someone else. The emptiness echoed with my own possibilities. It was a beautiful sound. I began to keep a notebook. A simple spiral-bound thing. I kept it hidden beneath the seat of the folding chair. In it I did not write feelings. I did not write grievances. I wrote facts. I wrote numbers. I wrote lists. I drew maps of small towns. I calculated distances. I noted the names of law firms I saw advertised on bus benches downtown. I recorded the questions I needed to ask. The notebook was as practical as a hammer. It was a tool for building a new life. And I wrote in it only in that room. The light was so good. I could see everything clearly. One afternoon I was in the sunroom. I had the notebook open on my lap. I was studying a map. I did not hear him approach. His shadow fell across the page. I did not startle. I simply closed the book slowly. I looked up. He was standing outside the glass, squinting in. He tapped on the pane. I rose and opened the door. "What are you doing out here all the time, May?" he asked. His voice was not suspicious. It was bemused, puzzled, like he had found me studying a colony of ants. "Just thinking, Robert." He leaned in slightly, trying to see the room around me. "It's so bare. Don't you want to make it cozy? I could help you pick out a nice rug. I like it like this. The simplicity is restful." He looked at me. He was searching for a subtext, for a hidden complaint. He found only a placid face. He shrugged. "Well, it's your hideaway." He used that word, hideaway. It suggested a child's fort, a temporary retreat. He smiled. "Just don't forget you have a real home to take care of too." "I won't," I said. And he left. He had come to check on me. To reassure himself that my eccentricity was contained. That I was still within the fence of his understanding. And he left satisfied, because he had seen nothing but an empty room and a woman with a closed notebook. He did not see the blueprint spread across my lap. He did not see the coastline of Maine. He did not see the calculations of a silent exit. The glass walls which seemed to make me so visible actually made me invisible. My transparency was my camouflage. He looked right through me and saw exactly what he expected to see. A woman at rest. A woman with a hobby. That was the final lesson of the sunroom. It taught me that the most powerful things are often mistaken for nothing. Silence is mistaken for agreement. Stillness is mistaken for idleness. Patience is mistaken for passivity. An empty room is mistaken for a lack of imagination. He saw a hobby. He saw a hideaway. He saw a quaint project. He was looking at a seed and thinking it was a pebble. He did not understand the ferocious potential lying dormant within it. He did not understand that I was not hiding away from something. I was gathering myself for something. I was in here becoming real in a way he could never comprehend because his reality was made of ledgers and deeds and visible assets. My reality was being made of light and silence and the slow steady pulse of a plan forming itself in the warm empty space. He thought the sunroom was the destination. It was the launchpad, and he never once felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. People have a need to fill empty spaces. It is a kind of panic, I think. A vacuum of purpose makes them nervous. They see a bare shelf and they must put a knick-knack upon it. They see a blank wall and they imagine a painting. They see an empty room and their minds race with furniture, rugs, side tables, lamps. They cannot abide the silence of unoccupied space. It feels like a question they have not yet answered. So when they looked into my sunroom through its perfect clear walls and saw nothing, they were compelled to ask, "What will you put in there, May?" The woman from the garden club asked me. Her eyes were already decorating the space. "I see a lovely wrought iron set. 2 chairs and a small table. You could have your morning coffee here. It would be so charming." My neighbor asked me. She peered from her side of the fence. "Oh, it's wonderful. So much light. You could have hanging baskets everywhere. Ferns, orchids. It could be a little jungle." Even Robert in his way asked, "It's so bare. Don't you want to make it cozy?" He offered the rug. He offered the wicker. I would smile at them all. A soft closed smile. "I haven't decided," I would say. Or "The light is enough for now." They would nod, but their eyes would flicker with a kind of polite confusion. They could not comprehend it. An empty room was a problem to be solved. A canvas to be painted. A stage to be set. They saw absence. I saw purity. Because I had spent a lifetime filling spaces. I had filled this house with the furniture of Eleanor's approval. With the colors Robert deemed respectable. I had filled my days with the tasks they deposited in my path like stones. I had filled my mind with their schedules, their preferences, their unspoken rules. I had filled my own silence with the echoes of their needs until my own voice became a faint strange sound I hardly recognized. I was a vessel perpetually brimming with the business of other lives. The contents were not mine. I was just the container. The sunroom was the first space I had ever encountered that was truly mine. Not ours. Mine. I had built its bones. I had sealed it against the weather. I had earned its emptiness with the ache in my muscles and the new calluses on my palms. To fill it would have been a desecration. It would have been to repeat the old pattern. To take this sacred hollow and clutter it with the expectations of others, with the shoulds and the supposed tos. A chair would invite someone to sit. A table would imply a shared cup of tea. A plant would become a responsibility, another quiet demand for water and care. I refused. I would not colonize my own territory with the familiar furniture of servitude. So I left it empty. Just the folding chair, a single stark object in a sea of light. That chair was not for comfort. It was for observation. It was a perch. When I sat in it, I was not relaxing. I was conducting the most important business of my life. I was taking inventory. I was listening to the quiet. I was learning the shape of my own thoughts when they were not bent to fit around someone else's presence. The emptiness was a mirror. It reflected back to me not my face but my inner landscape. In that vast blankness I could finally see the contours of my own spirit. I saw its resilience in the straight, strong lines of the walls I had raised. I saw its clarity in the unblemished glass. I saw its capacity for peace in the pools of sunlight on the bare wooden floor. The room did not need things because it was itself a thing of profound meaning. It was a physical poem about potential, about the freedom that exists before the first commitment is made. I would sit for hours. The light would move across the floor from east to west, painting a slow golden rectangle that stretched and thinned and disappeared. I watched its journey. I thought about time. His time was measured in billable hours, in quarterly reports, in the countdown to retirement. Hers had been measured in doses of medicine, in the turning of the seasons from one chair by the window to the next. My time had been measured in meals cooked, in floors cleaned, in the silent endurance of their needs. But in this room time became something else. It became spacious. It became a field I could walk across at my own pace. There was no alarm clock in that room. No schedule pinned to the wall. There was only the sun's graceful arc. It taught me patience. It taught me that some things cannot be rushed. That a plan must mature in its own season like a fruit on a branch. The emptiness also allowed for sound. Not the sound of voices but the true sound of the world. The tap of a branch against the glass in the wind. The distant cry of a hawk circling high above. The rustle of a creature in the fallen leaves outside. The soft almost musical creak of the new wood settling. These were honest sounds. They were not asking anything of me. They simply were. I listened to them and my own internal noise. The static of worry and resentment began to fade. It was replaced by a deep resonant quiet. A listening quiet. The quiet of a forest, not a tomb. People thought the room was lonely. They pitied its bareness. They saw a lack. I saw a luxury. It was the luxury of unclaimed space. In a world that constantly tells women to shrink to make ourselves smaller to fit into the corners of other people's lives, this room was a rebellion. It was expansiveness. It was a declaration that I could occupy space simply because I existed. I did not have to justify it with utility. I did not have to decorate it to please a guest. It was mine, and its emptiness was the most beautiful thing I owned. It was in that emptiness that my future began to take shape. Not as a detailed picture but as a feeling. A sensation of openness, of air, of light. When I thought of my next life I did not imagine a house filled with new things. I imagined a view of water. I imagined a small quiet garden. I imagined mornings that belonged to me. The sunroom was the mold for that future. It was the practice. Sitting in that empty room was practicing how to be free. It was practicing how to be alone without being lonely. It was practicing how to hold my own company as precious. Robert's offers of a rug of furniture were his attempts to domesticate the space. To make it safe and understandable. To bring it back into the realm of the normal, the controllable. An empty room was a mystery. A furnished room was a solved problem. He wanted to solve me. To furnish my mind with his assumptions. But I held the emptiness against him like a shield. I liked it like this. The simplicity is restful. The last time someone asked me about the room was at a rare dinner party. The wife of Robert's colleague leaned toward me. I hear you have a fabulous new sunroom. What's your design scheme? I looked at her across the table. The candlelight flickered in her eager eyes. She was a woman who lived for schemes, for themes, for the anxious curation of a perfect life. I smiled. It's all done, I said. Oh, she exclaimed. Already? What's the theme? Light, I said. The theme is light. She blinked, not understanding. She waited for more. But there was no more. That was the entire design document. That was the only furnishing required. Light. And in that light I saw everything I needed to see. I saw the past for what it was. I saw the present as a temporary station. And I saw the future not as a furnished room but as an open door leading to another empty, beautiful space waiting for me to define it, not with things but with my own presence. The room was not a destination. It was a lens. And through it my whole life came into a final, sharp, glorious focus. The last day was a day of perfect ordinary weather. A blue sky with high white clouds moving slowly like thoughtful ships. The air was crisp but the sun held a promise of warmth. It was a day for beginnings, not for endings. Inside the house it was a cathedral of absence. The movers had come and taken the big furniture, the things that had weight and history. All that remained were echoes and dust motes dancing in the shafts of light through bare windows. The floors were clean swept. The walls looked strangely innocent without their pictures. It was no longer our home. It was a shell, a beautiful hollow shell waiting for its next inhabitants to project their lives upon it. I walked through the empty rooms. My footsteps echoed. In the kitchen the hum of the refrigerator was gone. The silence was absolute. It was the silence after a symphony has ended and the audience has not yet dared to clap. I had packed a single suitcase. A soft-sided leather one that had been a gift from Robert many anniversaries ago. It stood by the front door like a patient dog. Inside it held only what was mine. The few pieces of jewelry from my mother. My father's copy of Emerson's essays, the margins filled with his tiny precise handwriting. A change of clothes. A toothbrush. The photograph of my parents on their wedding day, young and hopeful, their faces turned toward a future they would not get to see. The suitcase was light. I could carry it easily. I had become accustomed to carrying weight. This was nothing. I went to the sunroom one last time. I did not sit. I stood in the center of the floor. The light was magnificent. It poured in from all sides, illuminating the wood grain on the floor, the tiny imperfections in the glass, the faint ghost of my own reflection hovering in the air. I had built this perfect empty vessel of light. It had served its purpose. It had taught me I could build. It had given me a place to think, to plan, to become. I would not miss it. You cannot miss a tool once the work is done. You simply put it away. This room was my tool. And my work here was finished. I walked back into the house. The kitchen counter was a vast plain of clean formica. I placed 2 items upon it. The first was the envelope. The one marked proof. I did not slide the statements out. I left it sealed. The word faced up. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact. Like a geological sample left for a scientist to examine. Here is the core. Here is the evidence of the climate that existed here. Draw your own conclusions. Next did I place the train ticket. A one-way first-class ticket to Rockport, Maine. The paper was thick and substantial. The printing was crisp. It was for a train leaving this evening. A smooth, quiet journey north along the coast. I had chosen first class not as an extravagance but as a promise to myself. A promise of space, of a wide seat, of a window to myself, of a journey made in comfort and dignity. It was the first purchase I had made for the new May. It felt like an investment. I did not write a note. What words could possibly bridge the chasm between the truth in that envelope and the life we had pretended to live? Words would have diminished it. They would have turned it into a scene from a melodrama. A confrontation. I wanted no confrontation. I wanted an absence. A sudden profound absence that would speak louder than any shouted truth. The empty house would be the note. The sunroom standing mute in the backyard would be the note. The missing suitcase would be the note. And the ticket stub, that was the period at the end of the sentence. I looked at the 2 objects lying side by side on the counter. The past and the future. The evidence and the escape route. They looked like artifacts in a museum display. Case 27, the quiet disappearance of a wife. I felt nothing but a deep calm certainty. This was not an act of anger. It was an act of geometry. I had drawn a line. And now I was stepping over it. I picked up my suitcase. I walked to the front door. I did not look back. I did not pause for a final glance at the staircase or the fireplace or the space where our bed had been. Those were props on a stage one was leaving. I opened the door. The outside air rushed in fresh and cool. I stepped onto the porch. I closed the door behind me. The click of the lock was a soft final sound. I took the key from my keyring. The metal was warm from my pocket. I bent and slipped it through the mail slot. I heard it land on the hardwood floor inside with a tiny definitive clink. A sound so small for a gesture so vast. Then I walked down the path to the driveway. I did not get into my car. I had sold it the week before. A man from 2 towns over had given me cash. I had used that cash for the ticket. I walked to the end of the street and hailed a taxi. The driver was a young man with music playing softly. "Where to, ma'am?" "The train station, please." He nodded and pulled into traffic. I watched the neighborhood slide by. The houses with their trimmed lawns, their sunrooms, their lives unfolding behind glass. I felt no connection to any of it. I was already gone. The train station was bustling with the energy of departures. I bought a newspaper and a bottle of water. I found my platform. The train was there, sleek and silver, humming with contained power. I boarded. I found my seat by the window. I stowed my suitcase. I sat down. The upholstery was clean and firm. The window was large. I watched the platform fill with people embracing, weeping, laughing. Goodbyes and hellos. My own departure was witnessed by no one. It was a private eclipse. The train gave a lurch and began to move. The city began to slide away. First the backs of buildings, then industrial yards, then suburbs, then open fields. The rhythm of the wheels on the tracks was steady and hypnotic. Clack clack, clack clack. It was the sound of distance being created. With every rotation I was farther away. The calluses on my hands rested in my lap. They were my souvenirs, my proof, not of his lie but of my truth. I had built something, and now I was building something else. A life. I did not wonder what he felt when he came home. I did not picture his face when he saw the envelope, when he saw the ticket, when he walked through the empty ringing house, when he looked out at the sunroom, my empty monument. His regret or his rage or his bewilderment was no longer my atmosphere. I had stepped out of his climate. I was in a new weather now, the weather of my own choosing. The train moved north. The sky began to soften into twilight. The first star appeared, a pinprick of light in the vast blue. I thought of the sunroom filling with dusk. The last of the day's light would be fading from its floors. It would stand empty and beautiful in the gathering dark. He might go out there. He might stand in the space I had made. He might finally understand. The sunroom was never the hobby. The escape plan was never a dramatic plot. The escape plan was the woman. The woman who learned to read a blueprint. The woman who learned to trust a level. The woman who learned that her own 2 hands could build a door and that her own 2 feet could carry her across the threshold. The escape plan was her own awakening. And you cannot put an awakened woman back to sleep. You cannot unbuild a room made of light. You cannot unsay a truth that has been silently lived. The train carried me on through the falling night. The clack-clack of the wheels was a lullaby. I closed my eyes. I did not dream. I simply rested in the motion. In the forward momentum. For the first time in 32 years I was not waiting for someday. I was riding toward my tomorrow. And the light inside me, the light I had cultivated in that empty glass room, burned steady and calm and bright enough to guide me all the way home.